Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here.
Can say again, please.
Houston, we've had a problem.
The mission of Apollo 13 and the encounter of problems on the mission brought forth change within the NASA program, opened up the public's eyes to the dangers of space travel, and led to the exchange of ideas in space exploration and the improvement of the relationship between the United States and Soviet Union.
Jim Lovell was born on March 25, 1928 in Cleveland, Ohio. In 1962, Lovell applied to become an astronaut for the Gemini and Apollo program and was accepted.
John Swigert was born in Denver, Colorado on August 30, 1931. Swigert was later accepted into the NASA Astronaut Group 5 in April of 1966.
Fred Hayes was born on November 14, 1933 in Biloxi, Mississippi. Hayes was one of 19 astronauts to serve in the NASA Astronaut Group 5. He took on the roles of lunar module pilot in Apollo 13.
Apollo 13 was the seventh mission to the moon in the American Apollo space program. The craft was launched on April 11, 1970 in Florida at the Kennedy Space Center. However, 2 days after launch, the lunar landing was aborted after an oxygen tank exploded, causing the rest of the spacecraft to fail.
The idea of traveling to the moon led to the encounter of competition between the United States and Soviet Union. The space race was not just about displaying technological superiority but also economic power. Early on, President Dwight D. Eisenhower wanted cooperation between the U.S. and Soviets on space initiatives. He sent letters to the Soviet leadership in 1957 and 1958. Eisenhower suggested the Soviets and U.S. keep space travel peaceful. However, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev rejected the offer. The U.S. was persistent on trying to develop rules for peaceful space activities. This led to the peaceful uses of outer space rule in the creation of the United Nations Committee on Outer Space, which the Soviet Union later joined. After Sputnik's launch in 1957, the Soviet Union felt as though they were ahead of the United States in terms of space exploration. In order for the United States to claim aeronautical superiority over the Soviets, they passed a Space Act which allowed the U.S. to make notable progress over the Soviets. In efforts to advance in the space race, the United States designed Project Mercury, which was the first program to put man on space. The project was first initiated in 1958 and completed in 1962. Because of this, the United States was able to further the progress in space travel, which eventually led to the successful moon landing mission of Apollo 11. This would be the mission that would end the Soviets' leadership in the space race and would put the U.S. on top.
Apollo 13 was to be the third mission to land on the moon. However, the mission failed due to the explosion of oxygen tank number 2, which led to the technological failures across the entire spacecraft. The failure of Apollo 13 can be almost entirely attributed to the technological side of the mission. These technological failures were mainly due to the lack of precautions taken before the mission. The number 2 oxygen tank had been a part of the service module from the Apollo 10 mission, but was removed for modification and damage. The tank was fixed, tested, and then used in the Apollo 13 service module. There was a countdown demonstration test that would fill, test, and empty the tanks. The test would apply pressure to the vent line of the oxygen tanks, and this would force oxygen out to the fill line. The test could only be passed if the oxygen tanks released the required amount of 50% of its contents. Oxygen tank number 1 passed the test, however, oxygen tank number 2 did not, releasing only 8% of its contents. The engineers then decided to just get rid of the rest of the contents by using the tank's internal heater and fan. Replacing the oxygen tanks would take 45 hours and could possibly damage other components in the spacecraft. This would cause the flight to be delayed for about a month, so NASA and the contractor officials did not replace the oxygen tanks. The Apollo 13 mission was launched on April 11, 1970 at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida at 2:13 p.m. Days before the launch, however, backup lunar module pilot Charles Duke accidentally exposed the crew to German measles. Command module pilot Ken Mattingly did not have immunity to the disease and was replaced by backup command module pilot John Swigert. The mission was going smoothly until at 55 hours, 55 minutes, oxygen tank number 2 blew up, causing number 1 to fail as well. The explosion caused bay number 4 to be completely blown off, caused pressure in one of the service module's 2 cryogenic tanks to drop to 0, and the command module's normal supply of electricity, light, and water to be lost. However, the flight crew used the tanks to feed the required supplies to the craft's 2 fuel cells, which were needed for the electrical power, oxygen, and drinking water. After the explosion, Jim Lovell famously said, "Houston, we have a problem here." Within 90 minutes of the explosion, Odyssey's oxygen and fuel cell power was almost gone. To save the Odyssey's battery for re-entry, the crew had to move into the lunar module Aquarius. While the ground crew worked to solve the problems, Aquarius would be the lifeboat of the flight crew. Hayes and Lavelle had to go through the connecting tunnel into Aquarius to activate his systems before Odyssey lost all of its power. When the crew entered Aquarius, they faced the possibility of giving into carbon dioxide asphyxiation.
To solve the problem, the flight crew created an air purifier with a plastic bag, duct tape, a haze, and a lithium hydroxide cartridge. The flight crew needed to get the correct alignment with the stars into Aquarius's guidance platform, which would fix their orientation in space. The gravity around the moon was strong enough to kickstart the engines of the module and send the crew back to Earth. Mission Control decided to switch off all power and use gravity to bring the crew back to Earth, while they got the crew into a simulator to try and solve the problems that were occurring. The ground crew figured out how to turn on the command module in 3 days, which would have usually taken about 3 months. When Lavelle tried to control the lunar module, the dramatic shift in center of gravity when the ships were linked made the control stick work in the opposite way it was supposed to. To steer a course back to splashdown, the crew had to perform a do-or-die rocket burn. The crew had to ignite the lunar module's engine, which was supposed to land on the moon, but would now be used to give them a chance to get back to Earth. On the way back to Earth, the crew cut loose Aquarius because it did not have a heat shield, unlike Odyssey. The crew splashed down at 1:07 p.m. in the Pacific Ocean on April 17th. The mission lasted 142 hours, 54 minutes, and 41 seconds. Even though some people classify Apollo 13 as a failure because the mission had wasted $375 million due to human errors and technical anomalies, it still positively affected NASA and the U.S. For example, after the space race, President Nixon wanted to reduce tension between the U.S. and Soviets. Phil Handler suggested that the U.S. and Soviets develop a docking system where they would be able to rescue astronauts. This mission was called the Apollo-Soyuz Test Project and was launched in 1975. Even though cooperation between the two space programs would be a challenge, they were still successful in developing docking systems. Also, the mission still symbolized the improvement of relationships between the two countries. Also, imperative lessons were learned during the mission. Apollo 13 brought forth attention to many problems that NASA did not focus on before. For example, NASA modified oxygen tanks so that there were no combustible materials in contact with the tank. Also, NASA began thoroughly reviewing test procedures much more than they did in the past. Apollo 13 impacted society in the sense that it opened the eyes of the public to the dangers of space travel, but it still sparked interest in space travel by a large amount. Even though Apollo 13 as a mission was a failure, it is still one of the most honorable moments in the United States space program. In Judy L. Hazday's book, The Apollo 13 Mission, Tom Paine, who investigated the mission after the accident, says, "There has never been a happier moment in the United States space program," and also says, "Although the Apollo 13 mission must be recorded as a failure, there has never been a more prideful moment."
The successful failure of Apollo 13 impacted the world's view of space exploration forever. Jim Lovell believes that the failure of Apollo 13 is, quote, the best thing to ever happen to NASA. This is because of the newfound information that can be used to improve space travel in the future. After encountering life-threatening problems such as loss of oxygen, shortage of food, and deadly low temperatures, the ground control and crew members needed to work together to exchange problem-solving ideas in order to sustain life in the dark and unforgiving conditions of space. The innovative ideas thought out during the days of Apollo 13 were later applied to space exploration for the better. The spaceship design was reconfigured with new and improved wires and extra oxygen tanks. These technological improvements were incorporated in later Apollo missions, such as Apollo 14. Even though Apollo 13 was a successful failure, the consequences that came with it were still damaging to NASA. Funding after the 1970s dropped from $5 billion to $4 billion, and research and development funding dropped from $2.9 billion to $2 billion. Because of the drop in funding, the public's view on space exploration turned to a more negative side because of skepticality of space safety.
The near disaster of Apollo 13 was a learning experience for everybody. It emphasized the reality of the danger of space travel and helped fix the many problems that occurred during the mission so that they would never happen again.
The mission of Apollo 13 not only helped solve many problems with space travel, but it also helped bring new ideas on how space travel could be successful in the future.